kind of short notice. I'm Ron Briggs. I'm the state senator for District 34, which is right here. We have Representative Beth Harrell here. We have County Commissioner Lori Bees here. We have, and I'm just sorry I forgot your name, representative from Senator Udall's office. So we're all up here to kind of hear a little bit about Forest Service's plans for the monument fire and maybe some overall approaches to fire season as it shows up here in the next little bit. And hopefully we'll have any fires to worry with, but we're certainly looking at some warm weather, and I hope that we avoid any sort of major occurrence. So with that, I'd be happy to turn this over to Beth Humphreys with the Forest Service and let her introduce the people here with them and just get on with the show. So thank all of you once again for being here.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm glad to see we did get a few people here tonight. This is great. I know it was kind of a last-minute thing, but I'm sure you all are used to wildfires and last-minute meetings held by the Forest Service to try to give you some information. I'm Beth Humphrey. I'm the District Ranger for the Sacramento Ranger District. I've met quite a few of you, but there's quite a few of you I haven't met. Several of you I've already met that I knew your names but haven't seen your faces, so it's good to be here tonight. And thank you for letting us come into your community and talk with you tonight. And we're going to give you the opportunity to talk with us as well. So that's kind of the beauty of these things, is get to know each other a little bit. I'm here with several staff that I hope we're going to be able to answer any questions that you might have. We're going to give you an update on the monument fire, which is the current fire that's burning over here near Agua Chiquita, near Brook Canyon, all kind of back in this direction. This one started on Friday evening. It was a lightning strike, and we've been on that fire since it started. So we've got quite a bit of information to give you, a little bit of an update on where the fire is today, a little bit of information about our strategies moving forward and how we're looking at handling this fire. And what I'd like to do is just introduce everybody that's here standing up front first, and then each of us are going to have a little chance to talk with you a little bit, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. I'm going to introduce Loretta first because I'm going to go from my right to left. This is Loretta Benavides, and I'm just going to...
Right, I'm Loretta Benavides, and I'm going to help. I'm the PIO, first of all, on the monument fire. I'm also the public affairs officer on the Lincoln National Forest. So I'm going to help facilitate the meeting tonight. One thing to keep in mind, we don't have a microphone, so if any of you cannot hear us, just raise your hand. That'll give us a cue that you're not able to hear us, and we'll try our very best to project. Otherwise, you may want to move up to the front if you're having a hard time hearing, but again, if when we get to the question-answer session, if you have questions from the audience, then I'm going to get up real close to you so that we can make sure that everybody in the audience can hear, including the panel or the folks that are here from the Forest Service. So anyways, real informal. We're looking for a lot of engagement and interactive dialogue. So again, we will open up, we'll have the monument fire update first. There's maybe about 11 slides and then some photos, and then we'll move into the question answer session. So now I'm going to go over to Travis Mosley.
Hello, I'm Travis Mosley. I'm the Forest Supervisor here in the Lincoln National Forest. Appreciate coming out to me and spending some time with you talking about this fire and what we're trying to do here and how we're going to be managing that. So I'll probably speak a little bit more towards the end of the evening once we have had some conversation about what's going on and listen to your feedback and input and thoughts and that kind of thing, and we'll go from there. But I'll leave this mostly up to the technical folks here that are firefighters that know what they're doing here and how we're going to do it, so they'll be letting us know about that. So.
I'm Ron Reese in the Sacramento District Fire Management Officer. Finch, and I'm the Assistant District Fire Management Officer.
Good evening, Charles Lippincott. I'm down from Idaho, been to the Lincoln many times, helping them during fire season.
Good evening, my name is Andy Belinas, I'm the Deputy District Ranger for the Central Government District.
Good evening, I'm Tony McWilliams. I'm the Assistant Fire Management Officer for Fuels here on the second array.
I'm Ryan Whitaker, the Fire Staff Officer for the force, been done all the work, so.
I'm Beth Mitchell, I'm a Public Information Officer on the Lincoln.
So that's the folks who are here from the Forest Service, but then we want to hear from you as well. So would you introduce yourself, and then we'll work through the audience real quick.
My name is Don Brown, and I live here in Weed.
My name is Noel Raven. I was born and raised here in Weed. I retired from the Forest Service.
I'm Gary Gage from Pinyon.
Jency Gage from Pinyon.
Michael Rigger, Alamogordo.
Lori Dees, Otero County Commissioner.
You got Harold, State Representative.
Jim Allen, Hacker, Otero County President, 1-year President.
I'm Martin Allen, and son is young, but I retired after 32 years of the Board of Service.
Dan and Deb Bell, Pinyon Fire Department.
Melanie Goodman, I'm with Senator Tom Udall's office.
Nancy Sutherland, I live here in Weed.
I'm not getting that. I'm Donna Smith from Weed.
I'm Tom Smith from Weed, Dark Ridge Observatory.
Brady and Jake Tharp from Weed, New Mexico. I'm Secretary Treasurer for the Weed Community Association and the OIC at the Sacramento Post Office.
Gary Stone, this is my wife Debbie.
Did we catch you? Yeah. Did we catch you? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. How about right here?
Heather Lewis from Pinyon, lives in Sacramento.
Arden from Pinyon, Arden Lewis from Pinyon.
And this is?
Saley.
Okay. Beth, over there from the back row.
Travis Lewis from Tunarosa, New Mexico.
Mike Jones, Weed.
Neil Henry, the Sac Weed Fire Department.
Tom Fry from Sacramento.
Bonnie Allison, Weed. Peter Medeiros,
Frank Medeiros.
Walt Kaufman, Highway 24 somewhere.
somewhere in between. Joyce Comross, I live between Mayhill and Weed.
Jen Griggs from Alamogordo.
Ron Briggs, State Senator from Commonwealth.
I'm Yvonne LaBelle, I live about 8 miles down the canyon on there.
And I'm Debbie Jameson, and I live here in Weed.
Thank you. Okay.
And this is the lady on the camera.
Move on. Okay, thank you all very much for that. And again, thank you. It does feel like it was last minute notice, but I'll tell you a story real quick before we kick off. About 3:30 this afternoon, I had a call from somebody at NPR who covers this area, and she said, I'm confused. She goes, you're having a public meeting, but your fire's 20 acres. And I'm like, well, why are you confused? And she said, because usually your public meetings happen when you have a lot of acres. And so we had a little bit of dialogue, and I told her that we could see some increased acreage out of this fire, but we didn't want to surprise the community, so that's why we're here tonight. So again, I'm not going to go into the PowerPoint. Our fire management officer from the district is going to take the lead on that. And then after we get into that dialogue where it's interactive and we're asking questions, answering questions, then we'll all tag team so that we can do the very best we can to answer those questions. Okay, so Ron.
This fire started by lightning on the 2nd. The location is just north of Monument Canyon. At the time, like most fires, it started about this big. But it grew to about a ½ acre overnight. So by the 3rd, it was a ½ acre. Since then, the area has received quite a bit of rain daily. So minimal fire behavior, mostly burning in old stumps, logs, dead and down logs, remnants of the Circle Cross fire of 1953. Currently, to this size, it has, with a little bit of assistance and some of its own movement, grown to about 31 acres. We have about 53 people out there, which is about, it's 4 Type 6 fire engines, and 2 Type 3s, 1 hotshot crew, and some miscellaneous overhead, coming up to 53 total. The majority of the perimeter of this thing is surrounded by roads, with the exception of the very south corner of it, which we'll get to a map at some point. It'll be easier to describe that to you, but we had to put some dozer line in there, connecting bridges to roads, from road to road, some containment line. So we do have containment line completely around this thing. Another slide. So I already mentioned Circle Cross fire burns there. That right there is some of the remnants, that stump. Just kind of what the area looks like. There's also recently been some mastication treatment, and that's also going to get affected by some of this fire. Next slide. So these are some examples of what it looks like within the fire area. Just going to go through a couple of these. And this is how it's looking currently. With some of that rain, grass is green. This snag is most likely a remnant from that time period or shortly thereafter from the Circle Cross. It's open, but you can see in the background we have some dense closed canopy. That appears to be spruce, closed spruce, forest type. Okay, now we're getting to what, this is some of the smoke production in here. Another slide. Keep going. Okay, this picture, when was this taken?
It was taken 2 nights ago. That was Sunday night.
Sunday night. So this is Sunday evening. What you can see here is this is the forest part. This is opened up out in the grass. The majority of what's burning is directly under the drip line of the tree or the needle, basically where the pine needles are going to fall. So immediately under the trees, it's cleaning up some of that duff, pine needles. Immediately under the tree, it's coming out to the grass, and in most areas it's going out on its own, especially as we continue to get rain with these systems that keep coming through daily. And this is some vacuum at night. It's not doing a whole lot. Very low flame lengths, moderate to low intensity fire behavior. It's kind of what we define as or perceive as beneficial. It's cleaning up some of the excess needles, leaves, if it's an oak, and also a lot of the remnants of dead and down from the Circle Cross. Okay. Yeah, you know, our perception in fire management now is we can manage, we're looking at fires differently. We realize that after over 100 years of fire suppression, putting fires out small, that has created an environment to where the forests are becoming unhealthy, they're overgrown. Anytime we have a fire, we still keep putting these small ones out. Fire is not able to get in there and do its natural thing. Clean things up, keep the forest open for the benefit of wildlife, and also for you folks who are ranchers, grazing. So we don't have a let burn policy. We are managing this. The conditions are right so that we can allow this fire to burn, encourage it to do some things like we did with the line construction we did. We don't want the fire to get down into Monument Canyon. That's a bad place for a fire to exist. It's steep, very heavy brush. We wouldn't be able to do a whole lot with it in consideration of the safety of firefighters. And it would eventually have the potential to work its way down into timber line. I don't see timber line, I don't see more fire for a while. And yes, we want to maintain cooperation with the adjacent agencies, volunteer fire departments, you folks, Otero County, all of you. We want to be transparent, open, and have this line of communication. That's why we're having this meeting tonight. And some of our considerations with our decision making are the risks to you and us. And right now, with the location of this fire and what you saw from some of those photos, this is an excellent opportunity for us to manage this thing safely. Very low risk to any values at risk. Values at risk being improvements, whether private property or an allotment. We did do some work, so we did cut some containment line to protect Holcomb Ranch? Yes. Protect the Holcomb Ranch private property in their spring. Those are some things that we are doing and considering with the weather. We keep getting moisture every day. It's going to continue to moderate this fire and its behavior. The field conditions I talked about already in regards to some of the buildup from Circle Cross, and also from some of the things that we have done with mastication. And I feel at this time it's a very low threat to communities, and we have a high probability of success to manage this and still get some this overload cleaned up. Predicted weather is supposed to dry out starting up this weekend, which would be good. That would help some of this stuff consume and burn a little better. I'm going to show you some slides here shortly where you're going to see a log. About 70% of that log burned up. Another 30% is still remaining on the ground, smoldering. It's probably gone out by now from some of the previous today. So it did clean that thing up 100%. We don't necessarily need to have it 100% cleaned up. If we can get between 40 and 70 in some of this stuff, and it's going to vary depending upon where it's located based on aspect, but it's going to do nothing but good things. And there'll still be some dead and down on the ground for bugs, critters, gophers. And obviously, this fire is a natural occurrence. It's historically, before we showed up, kept our forest healthy until we started putting stuff out. We're just taking this opportunity to let this one do its thing. And this, once again, this is about forest health. Forest health, healthy forest is more resilient to fire. Fire behavior is less catastrophic to the folks who are living in the periphery of it. It's a safer environment for you. This day and age, because of some of our past policies, with fire suppression and buildup, we've started coming under different terms. We've gone from extreme fire behavior to a term called area ignition. That's been experienced in a few parts in the West, a few parts of California that I'm aware of, the King Fire and the Rim Fire near Yosemite Park, where timber was burning like grass. it would run miles in a day, a huge prime timber. So we're in a state like that, in this day and age, climate change, if that's what you want to call it, things are obviously dry and different. With the amount of moisture we're getting in the environment and the condition of the forests. So, what we're doing is going to reduce future fire behavior in that area. It's going to minimize risk to our firefighters. The tempo of this thing is not quite at the pace as it would be with a wildfire, where we have air tankers and helicopters flying and exposing a lot of people to risk for using those types of equipment. Any
pictures?
Okay, do you have any questions for me up to this point?
How close is to the nearest dwelling? Repeat the question.
She wants to know how close it is to the nearest dwellings. Based on a map, 3 air miles.
How many?
3 air miles.
Okay. Anybody else?
Okay, this is the 566 road for Monument Trailhead Road. Obviously, you can see this green grass in here. That's going to create a decent buffer for a containment line. There is fire actively burning in there right now. That was taken this morning at about 11:30 after the sun had gotten onto it for a couple of hours. So the day is starting to warm up. And this is the kind of smoke production we're getting out of it at this time, or at least as of the time of this photo. Here's another one. Here's some of the dead and down, the decadence I was talking about earlier, and what the fire is doing with that. With moisture, it's burning up a good chunk of it. Right here, it's not getting all of it, but it's still smoldering and continuing to burn in some of that. And as it comes out into outside of those sticks and medium, larger diameter pieces of fuel, it's for the most part going out. But some good smoldering and consumption going on there. It may not burn up that entire log, but any percentage, preferably 40% or more, would be beneficial. Again, it burned up a majority of that, a good chunk of it, spread out from it, and went out on its own. Same thing. And you can see how thick it is in there. That's a photo of one of the previous logs just from a different angle. And what kind of smoke production we're getting out of this. Okay, this does not have fire in it yet, but I took this picture myself because I wanted to give you an example of what a good majority of that area looks like, as far as for wildlife, for grazing. Deer would have difficulty getting through that. If we can get some reduction, again, 40 to 70% of some of these steady down stuff, it would be very beneficial to a lot of others. This is the main bowl of that tree. So right there, we got 70% of that thing is consumed. There's maybe another 25, 30% of it left. The butt end of it is still smoldering, but probably from today's rain, it's anybody's guess if that's even still burning. Different angle of the same shot.
Last slide.
Last slide. And again, just wanted to show you an example. Like for this tree here, what I was talking about with the drip line, and the needle cast comes down and getting the end of that, is cleaning that up and then going out. Do
is.
we have maps?
That's it.
We don't have a map slide?
No, it's the only map that we have.
Okay, speaking to the map, any of you who would like to come up closer, I welcome you to come on up. When this thing started, we had to do some management planning. When we plan for something like this, there are so many weather variables. The forecast can say something one day, it'll say give us a 3-day prediction, but then it'll change. There's a lot of opportunities in areas out there, in this particular area that we saw where we might be able to use this tool to continue some of this activity. So we created a box so that we would not limit ourselves. This is the overall big picture box. This right here is the area that we're talking about right now. This larger box we plan for, which we're not going to go there. We don't want to go that big, but we want to keep our options open. That's 14,000 acres. This planting area here, using Jim Lewis and Monument Trailhead Road with a line cutting it off to the south, is 940 acres. So we're looking at just managing this thing within that 940 acres. Feel very confident that we can be successful with that. I showed you what it looked like from the road, on the Monument Trailhead Road. There's a huge, well, it's a fairly large green buffer. Any of you in here who fought fire, we don't always have the advantage of having a road and that. So this is a very good place to be able to maintain this fire within. We do have that dozer line is right there. I'm not very steady. I drank some coffee before I came. But from about there to there, this is a dozer line. We have some the hot shot crews and the engine crews. We've been doing some snagging and some burn preparation along the roads along that dozer line. Whereas this main fire continues to burn out, we would like to get in and black line some of these areas, especially where there's continuous fuel. The dozer line at the south end doesn't have the luxury of a meadow running along it, so that is something that we want to reinforce with a black line. That's where we're going to put fire down and get a buffer of about 50 to 200 feet. And if conditions are acceptable, the interior, we're going to do a test run with some aerial ignition on some ridge tops. Most likely over here, starting on the north, coming down, there's a little ridge system here, placing some PSD balls. They're these time-delayed, they look like ping pong balls, time-delayed, and they're like little spot fires. So they start out about this big. We're going to do a test run on the tops of the ridges, send the helicopter away, and watch it, see just what kind of effects and fire behavior we get from that before we bring it back up. And if all goes well, it looks good, the fire behavior remains moderate to low, but we're still getting some stuff burning and going good, but not too hot. Then we'll bring it back up and we'll continue to treat the rest of this fire area. Yes, sir.
Just a quick question, I'm a little confused. So is that black line, or is that to actually do to burn? You know, is that
black line is what we burn. We burn to create a burn buffer.
Okay, the ping pong balls are for a buffer, is that correct?
No. No, we'll be using people on the ground, mostly on that south end, to create a buffer or black line on the south end. And then in the interior, after that is done, it is burned down, cooled down, to where once we light something in the interior, if it does happen to dry out, you get drier conditions, single-digit RHs, temperatures come up, fire starts becoming more active, it has an area that's already been burned and cooled down to bump into.
I'm with you there, and the question is about the aerial ignition.
Okay.
Will that be used for for this black line effort?
No,
Or is that
no,
gonna
that's
be
for the
used-
interior,
Okay, that's fine.
interior effort and on the ridge tops. Good question. Yes, sir. He got first.
I've got one question on the wildfire versus controlled burn. I spent about 10 years with the Forest Service earlier in my life, and we always had to write a prescription for any kind of controlled burn. Do you still have to do that?
Not for this, because this is a wildfire being managed.
So you don't have a prescription that you can go in or out of?
Nope.
But you would, if you went out here and burned a section of property anywhere for management, controlled burn, then you would have to write a prescription for that?
Yes.
But you do not have to write a prescription for this?
No.
How do you know when it's in or out of what a prescription should be?
Well, rain has a lot to do with it. Yeah, we'll get our fuel specialist on.
Gary, I'll try to answer your questions best I can. When we're planning a prescribed burn, we do write a prescription. We build a window that we want to handle that in. That's usually a very large window based on weather that affects fire behavior. In this situation, we've already got fire on the ground. So we're looking at the fire behavior side of it and moderating fire behavior in a window, and we try to find windows of opportunity from the weather to keep that fire behavior in that low to moderate. So we kind of work the same problem, but from the other end, if that makes sense.
Can I chime in a little bit too? That's a good answer. But to say, we also look at the fuels conditions. So on a normal June 6th, this would not be going on. This is an odd year where we've got a lot of green grass, we've got a lot of moisture coming in, we've seen it almost daily. So we're, in the back of our head, we're always planning these things, not planning them, but kind of looking forward. If we get a lightning strike and we have the opportunity like we do right now to manage it a little bit more, let it grow a little bit bigger, aid it on a little bit if we need to clean up that forest floor, then we have that opportunity. But on a normal June 6th, like 4 years ago, this would not be going on. We've had some strange years the last 3 or 4 years where we've had some moisture, so we've got that in our corner.
So just to make it clear, I'm not trying to be combative.
No.
And there's a man sitting right here in front. When we used to burn, our window was so narrow that once you got out of that prescription, then you had to call it a wildfire.
And on the prescribed fire, that's still the
You had
case.
to suppress it. I'm just wondering, over the years of more growth and more lateral effect and stuff like that, there's no doubt that I think fire is a good treatment. I do. But, you know, we've seen the fire of, we've seen what the spring fire in 1974 did to this. It took half of weed out. And then we watched what Scott Abel did. You know, it took people out. So we need to be sure that you guys are, this is a wildfire over here. Okay, if there's no prescription for it, that just sounds a little bit shaky to me. I know it's way out there, it's not close to a lot of things, but the other thing is when you let those burn like that, you're on somebody's allotment, grazing allotment. Okay, so you are taking forage from those grazing allotments, and what are you going to do about the AUMs that might take away from those allotments? And is there deferrals, grazing deferrals after you have a treatment like this?
I can't answer the grading question, but I can answer the fire part of that. Like I said, this is a different year. Those fires were extreme cases. There's a lot of forethought that goes into us even thinking about doing this kind of stuff. And like Tony said, once we get into the national initiative, get the lightning strike, there's already fire on the ground. There's not the pre-planning of running all the models that we run and all the stuff that goes into prescribed fire. But there's a lot of thought that Caleb, Ron, since he's been here, Tony, since he's been through all the years, of these opportunities when we get a strike that we can manage it a little bit more instead of just going in and suppressing it and trying to manage that over 100 years of fuel load that we've got out there.
And there are models that we do run. I run them daily. on fires, on all fires, even the wildfires that we're in 100% suppression on because of the values at risk or the burning conditions at that time. We're running them on this every day. Those models are not 100% accurate. I'm not going to tell you that they are, but they're very useful in feeding back to us of, well, what's going to happen or what we can expect to happen. And I can tell you that all the models right now are saying this thing is low go. I mean, our prescribed burns are 3 times as much fire activity as this one is. This thing is creeping, it's skunking around. It's a great opportunity to use a tool that's natural to the ecosystem to clean up the forest. And Judy-Ann can tell you, that country, we've done that fuels work out there and cleaned that up, and I think you're happy with that. And this is just kind of a different tool extended onto that to do some more of it. And now we've got a great opportunity to do that. And I hope that answers your question, Gary.
Is there livestock on that allotment?
There's livestock on that allotment. I was talking to Judy-Ann earlier. I've been through the burn area several times and haven't seen any, and I think Travis was in there today and didn't see any, right? We're continually watching for that livestock.
One thing, just to address a little further on the grazing effects and what we would do in this situation. Given the fire effects that we're seeing out there, you know, I don't see any particular reason to look for deferment and things like that at this point. Mainly because when we think about deferment and trying to give it a rest after a fire, usually it's these big catastrophic events where you've scorched soil, you've really consumed a lot. And as you can see on this, just from the pictures, a lot of that grass is green and isn't really being affected, so where you're killing plants or anything like that. In fact, I think what we'll end up seeing in there is it's seeding into those bare spots that are created, and a little bit of grazing on 900 acres of the entire allotment that we have there. I don't see any reason that it affects the livestock grazing in terms of numbers, and obviously there'll probably be a little less forage in that 900 acres for a time. But once we start getting the monsoons, I think we'll see some it's brought back really pretty quick. So that's not running in my mind in this situation with these moderate and low intensity burning. It's just cleaning things up, skunking around the existing grass. I think probably most of the grass that exists there right now is going to stay there and be available for cows when the fire's over. One other thing too is relative to the prescriptions and the idea of, you know, working. I mean, obviously we're very much looking at the weather, the fuel moisture conditions, all of these things like Tony's talking about. We're putting in, we're modeling this to understand what we expect that fire to look like and how it's supposed to react, given the conditions, the weather, the topography, all of those kinds of things. But one thing too that always, I think, what we always have to think about is in situations like this, fire's going to happen out here in this landscape at some point. It's not if, it's when and how big. And so I kind of look at it in this situation is when things are lined up real nice, and we got the weather, we got the fuel moisture conditions, we got good green up, we backed off to an area that we feel is very high probability of success because we got road systems, green barriers along with the road system. That was one of the biggest things that we considered in this situation in terms of what's the highest probability of success here, and what's that perimeter going to look like, and then what's that also buys us a lot in terms of exposing firefighters to the risk of getting out there in snag patches and things like that. We don't want any injury or God forbid death in this situation, and snags are right there among them. So we can get some of that done, and it's in a situation where we can very much moderate the effects and the impacts. So I heard a guy put it this way: we can consume these fuels when we have a chance to, and the conditions are just right, so that we have a chance of managing it and controlling the effects of it, or we can save it for catastrophic conditions for some other time. And I think that's what we've done a lot of, and we recognize that. We're kind of sticking our toe into the pool with this one. It's not, 900 acres is not a huge one to bite off on. When we do prescribed burning, it's more than that. We did 4,000 acres here about a month ago down here on the Wads. So this is we're feeling pretty good about the conditions, and it's not a prescribed burn. It's definitely a wildfire, but it's something that in lots of ways we're looking at the same kinds of things. Like Tony said, you're entering into it from the other side. Instead of defining your window, you're reacting to the conditions that you have, and then figuring out what your techniques in firing, firing patterns, and how to get in there and do that in a safe way so that we control it. So all that black lining, and then we start getting in there and introducing a little fire to in the interior, so it starts to move around and do its thing and moderates that fire intensity.
If a big rainstorm comes and wipes it out, are y'all going to call it good, or are you going to keep on letting it burn?
Yep, it's done. It was started naturally, if it's put out naturally, so we had.
And that was one of the things I wanted to reiterate, is that it has to be a natural ignition, and how we define natural is either caused by lightning or a volcano. So the volcano is not going to be the ignition source, it's going to be lightning. But to put that into context, Ryan, an average year on the Lincoln, how many fires?
How many lightning strike fires?
Yeah, break them down, human cause and then lightning, just an average.
I don't know, I'm gonna have to. The last few years, we've only had 15, 20 fires over the whole forest.
Okay.
On average, we get maybe 3 to 5 campfires from campers. Typically, that's on average. It doesn't escape the ring, but it's called in because it's abandoned, basically. Lightning fires, we average anywhere between 10, 12, maybe 15. This year, we've had 2 campfires, and we've had 4 lightning strikes, I recall, 4 lightning strikes. The other thing to think about, too, is we've been looking at this option for the last, since 2012, 2013 on this district. And since I've been here since 2003, and since we started in 2012, I can recall maybe 4 incidents, wildfires, that we considered that we opted to suppress, that we didn't need to suppress, but the factors didn't line up. The weather didn't line up, everything didn't line up like this, so we opted to suppress, and we didn't need to. So that shows the continuity of how often this can occur on this forest. So Lincoln is pretty special. This is a really common tool on large forests or ponderosa pine landscapes. The Gila does this, mass acreage, 10, 20, 30,000 plus acres. But they have no values of risk at wilderness. The Coconino, those large forests, Mogollon Rim, Flagstaff, they've got numerous fires. They're doing this right now. It's low key. They've got higher humidities. The temps are high, but you've got higher humidities, higher fuel moistures, you've got green grass. The values are lower risk, and the overall risk is really low. And so it's a good opportunity to take them. And like what was alluded here, it's good. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And we got to start somewhere, because we know what we've done over the last 100 years hasn't been successful. So where do we start? And you can see by the pictures on this, you look at the green grass that's out there, you look at how much moisture we've had over the last month, you look at the cool temps, and you put all those together and you look at the landscape. We can look outside Wheaton, New Mexico right now, and you can know that the fire behavior that we get from any fires is going to be really low key. The other thing to consider too is everybody, the typical thought process of the term wildfire is large, running, standard placement wildfire. And that's been the case. That's what you see in the media. The media doesn't portray everything good that happens. All those good fires that happen, they don't talk about that because it's not exciting. But the term wildland fire, it could be a snag fire that's out there that's not gonna burn. It could be this fire that's smoldering around, or it could be a large wildfire that moves. The term wildland doesn't mean that it's destructive and it's gonna mow everything down. It's just the term, and what we need to define is what is a wildland fire and what is the management tool that we use. Like Ryan said, we all been here a long time. This is not typical of June, nor has the last 2 years been. This wouldn't be taking place in those years that we have wildfires, drought, severity, things like that. But you know what we've had for the last month and a half? We're all locals, and it's a good opportunity because we can either do it when the time is right, or we can allow it to happen on its own and it won't be the time is right. And there's plenty of fire scars across the forest to show that. The other thing to consider is firefighter safety. And you're going to see a shift. There's already a shift in the mindset of how we manage fires. Because if you look at the amount of firefighter deaths that have occurred just in the last 5 years, there's more firefighter deaths in the last 5 years than there have been for the last, say, 30 years. Snag fires, limbs coming out of trees, vehicle accidents, people responding to fires at midnight. For a snag fire that's not going to go anywhere, they hit an elk, they hit a snag, they run off the edge, and they die. And they're leaving behind their families, their kids, their loved ones, and that has to shift. And so how do we shift by doing that? We shift by the way we manage fires. And we don't allow those firefighters to take as much risk as what's happened in the past. There's always risk involved in the profession of a firefighter, but we need to be able to mitigate that. And so, sometimes we had, last night's a good example. We had a false alarm of a snag fire between Timberrod and the Monument Fire. Smoke settling in the canyon. Do we decide to go out there at night and look for it? Why? We know it's green, we know it's wet, we know the humidities are up, we know rain went through there. So why are we going to expose our firefighters to risk? It's just a tree, it's just a piece of brush. Is it worth them not returning it home at night? Little Lewis was a good example. Back then we had to bring some fire off the ridge and reduce that risk to firefighters. And it's a common tool that we use. It's just a decision that's made to manage a certain portion of the fire, the entire fire, or whatever deems necessary for those incidents. And I'll just end with this. Each incident is unique in its own. This isn't just a broad-based policy that we're going to manage every single fire that's out there. The amount of decision-making that took place in the first 24 hours after this fire started was the same amount of decision and planning that goes into prescribed fire. And so there's just a ton of planning that goes in. And so we're not pulling a rabbit out of a hat. We're making good decisions. We're making conscious-based decisions. Because we are also locals as well, and we don't plan to or intend to impact any of the locals as well. I have a wife and kids. She doesn't like it when I have smoke impact in my house. So with that being said, it's just a tool. Each incident is unique in its own. The other thing that you might see is the common practice on the Lincoln has been to suppress every single fire. It's the middle of August, it's monsoons, there's one tree out there, it's green, it's wet, it's not going to burn. The automatic practice is to go out there and put firefighters underneath that tree, let's cut it down and expose firefighters to that risk. We're not going to take that approach anymore. If we don't need to expose that person to that risk, we're not going to take it. Doesn't mean that we're just going to watch it and let it go. It may mean that we sit there at night and we camp on it and let it go out. We wait till it falls over, and then if we need to suppress it, we suppress it. There's areas on the district right now that are full suppression, and areas that we can allow these fires like this to take place in this current setting, the way the forest policies are written. When we get into the middle of August and we've got a fire and snag fire, and it's in an area that we can manage, but yet it's green, we know it's not going to go anywhere, we're still not going to go expose firefighters to that risk and cut that tree down. But we may just sit there and say, you know what, we're going to monitor it and see what happens. So here on the radio, we're monitoring it. Those are the decisions behind that decision, because it's all risk-based for firefighters. Yes, sir.
If you have a lightning fire, then you say that you wouldn't expose your men to the risk of cutting that snag, right?
It's case by case.
But if you had a man-made fire, like a campfire, in that snag, would you then expose your firefighters to risk?
it's case by case dependent. I'm not saying that if we get 20 lightning snag fires, that we're not going to cut that down. But if we have a snag fire that is nasty and dirty, we're going to sit there and watch it and let it come around. If it's a fire that's in the middle of June, we're obviously going to take an action, a suppression action on it, and put it out. But if it's in the middle of August, when it's wet and it's raining, and it's a lightning fire, and it's in an area of the district that we can manage, we may look at it. If it's man-caused fire, automatic full suppression no matter what.
That was my question.
Okay.
If it was a man-made fire, then you would go at any risk and cut down that snag? You're saying yes or no?
We'll take suppression actions on it, but we're not going to just take any risk. We're going to suppress it as safely as we can, but we're not going to expose a firefighter to an undue risk that could possibly hurt, injure, kill, or maim that person, but we're still going to suppress the fire. It's no different than what we do on these large wildland fires. We suppress large wildland fires. We suppress man-made fires, but we don't take extra risk. And what you see, the common mentality has been to suppress everything and expose firefighters to undue risk. There's already risk associated. We're just taking that undue out of it.
You know, one thing you could even look at this fire, we're suppressing this fire. We've got a line around it. We're working on a perimeter. You could almost look at it as an indirect attack. And you know, it's different tactics, but you know, when we talk about difference between a natural cause fire and a man-made and a person-caused fire, the tactics that you use are going to be the same. The way we assess our risk and exposure to our firefighters is going to be the same. Our objectives will be different. Our objectives for that fire will be very different. And you know, when we talk about man-made, right, it's suppression and minimize the effects and the impacts is the primary objective. In a natural cause situation, we can play with some more resource objectives. And I say play, but you can introduce these other kinds of objectives. But risk and exposure is right here, forefront in our minds, to everybody. Our firefighters, private lands, you know, structures, any of that.
So, did we answer your question directly, sir?
Yeah, that's fine.
I think we had a question back here.
Well, the gal over here in the red has had her hands up several times.
Okay, all I wanted to know is on these really remote fires, there's a lightning strike. How do you learn about them?
How do we find
How
them?
do you find out that there's a lightning?
Either a lookout or oftentimes, you know, you as locals locate them, call them into the sheriff.
I don't know where this is, but it seemed like it was remote, you know, like far
It
away.
was called in by a private party.
Oh, okay.
They use their power command.
Okay.
They used to have these called the power command.
And then with the lightning strikes, you know, you can see that evidence in a tree. And now we're even to get lightning maps that will show the lightning activity over a 24-hour period. And you can see that concentration of lightning strikes. So that can help you validate that it actually did occur. One thing I was going to mention real quick, and then we're going to bump over to Beth. Two things I have that are important.
What other fellow had a question?
The rest of
Where?
the questions.
When do you plan on fighting that fire?
What's that?
If it quits raining Thursday, when do you plan on putting it out?
Yep. Based on fire behavior. We've got a line around.
And the wind comes back in, what are you gonna do?
I don't anticipate it to stand up and run anytime soon with as wet as it is out there. We'd be able to continue with the blast lining we were talking about. That would create an adequate buffer. That's like indirect backfiring.
So you're not
Feel very
planning on
confident.
putting it out?
That's nature has. Yeah, I don't see putting it out with as much moisture and weather patterns we're up against.
Can I say something real quick? Just real quick. We look at the weather and we see it's going to get high temperatures for several days. And it's easy to correlate high temperatures with what we see on TV or wildfires in the past, which is definitely good, something to look at. But this June is not the June we had 4 years ago. We're going to get hot temps. It's typical for the Southwest. But is this June different from the June that we had Scott Abel and those other fires? It is. And what offsets those high temps is a higher fuel users. We've had several inches of rain just in the last few weeks, not to consider what happened before that. The green grass, what is the carrier of the fire on the Lincoln National Forest? It's the grass component. That's what gets the fires established. And that grass is green right now. And I know it's easy to correlate high temps with fire behavior, but you're going to see high temps, you'll see an uptick in smoke production. And typically when it's wet, you're going to see more smoke anyway, because you're not getting great consumption. But high temps and winds don't correlate to fire behavior unless you have the fuels that are dry that sustain it. If the fuels aren't dry, it's hot and it's dry and it's still not going to burn.
I'm going to weigh in a little bit because I think we're indirectly trying to get to the answer that you're looking for. And what I will tell you is that if this fire starts picking up to the point where we think the wind is going to carry embers or burn through, get a lot more intense, start looking to be a threat to any private property, any of the values at risk out there, we will suppress. If it crosses that line at any point, and I am the one that will be telling these guys, we will suppress that fire. So that will be our trigger point, is if the weather changes, if the conditions on the ground change, and if that fire, if the winds change and start blowing that fire in the direction of Monument Canyon, that is a trigger point for me to suppress that fire. So we will suppress at that point.
Helicopters and air tankers.
Yep. So there was a couple other questions. You had a question?
Y'all pretty well answered mine. I'm looking at those pictures and it's very obvious that there's so much fuel on the ground, it needs to be gone. That's one reason it gets so bad when it's dry. I just want to know how long, if the conditions stay the same, how long are y'all going to set on this fire?
We're planning the time frame is 14 days to the point of monitoring.
Whether it burns what you want to or not.
So about 14 days. Okay, so I do have something very important, so I'm going to put in real quick. We had 2 people join us after we did our introductions, and I'd like for them to introduce themselves. They are our partners. We all work closely together, and you may know them. So, Javier and Bob, please.
Good afternoon, folks. Javier Anderson, New Mexico State Forestry. We're also one of the interagency partners that works collaboratively with Forest Service, BLM, BIA. I'm the district forester. Our area covers Lincoln, Otero, all the way out east to the state line. So we have a large area, and it's myself and the fire management officer here. I'll let Dave introduce himself.
I'm David Cunningham, the fire management officer for the Capitan District, and we're actually located in Capitan. So, and I work very closely with Otero County Volunteer Fire Department. They're part of, actually they're our long arm because they can get to the fire much quicker than we can most of the time.
I was going to say, just real quickly, folks, our particular area and our area of interest is state and private lands. So you guys are our audience. That's a big piece of us. And our piece is really staying involved and staying in that decision-making process with them once it does reach those thresholds where it is starting to impact state or private lands. So that's where we kind of fall into the mix.
Did we have another question? Walt? Let's do Walt.
My name's Walt Kaufman. And I want to just compliment, there's a lot of strength in firefighting here. And these guys do know their business, and my comments don't reflect on them. I am concerned about the management of fires. This is a new, at least for me, a new idea here in the Sacramento region. And we've heard some of the, things the firefighters are doing, the plans they're making that sounds good, and recognize that we're talking black and whites here. We've got a case where obviously there's not a lot of risk right now. I mean, I'm not surprised that it probably went out while we've been here talking. Because there is, fuel moistures are high, we don't have winds, all the things you guys talked about, there's just not much risk with this fire. But I want to throw out, because this is a new thing, some ideas about management of fires on this district. And let me just say that first of all, the Forest Service has taken the management of the fire. And they're not sharing it with people here particularly. They're relying on their team to make decisions about whether this fire goes or not. So one thing I might suggest to the Forest Service is to find a way to involve the local communities in the decisions about what fire, what's the word, is managed and what fire is suppressed, and not just forward all that power within the Forest Service. And let me add to that when you guys, not you guys, but when the Forest Service or a federal agency fails to do a good job through bad management, who pays for that? You know, if you look at Los Alamos, for example, a few years ago, there was a fire down here at Carlsbad at the Caverns that was lit off on a red flag day by federal employees. The suffering is by the community, not by the Forest Service. And you could arguably talk about the Little Bear fire, where conditions changed. The fire started like all fires do, what was like this big. And then a few days later, we had 200 homes burned. The Forest Service didn't suffer much out of that, but the people in the homes suffered quite a bit, even with insurance and stuff, they suffered. And in that case, you might ask, well, what we did full suppression was what the Forest Service said from the get-go. But I just propose to you that because of the poor planning years before, it set up the circumstance to cause that kind of tragedy for that county. So here we are in this district, and I see a black and white presented here today. But I ask you, what happens on the next fire when it's not quite so black and white? We've seen weather change within hours up here. And during the spring, you guys have done fires up here. During the spring, the forecast, I heard somebody say, within 3 days, it could be totally different. I won't say it would be in red flag conditions because there is a lot of moisture out there. But for sure, the winds can change. And there needs to be some responsibility from the Forest Service and a willingness to accept responsibility for these fires if they get out of control. One of the questions I had, and I shared it with you guys, is, you know, say you have this wonderful fire that you're working and something happens. You know, I don't know what it is, but something happens. And recall that you have responsibility. And that fire blows out and runs over somebody's home or their barn. Who has responsibility for that incident? Will the Forest Service stand up and say, we're going to pay for that new home or that new barn, or, you know, God forbid somebody dies, we will be responsible for that? Because what I see right now is the federal agencies do not accept responsibility. They want the authority to call the shots, but they don't want to accept responsibility for what happens afterwards. And by the way, one way to mitigate that is to involve the community, and they're part of the problem. Yeah, I had some other minor things besides people losing private property, stuff like roads, damage to roads. You know, you guys are using Scott Abel, you know, that's a joyride in the best of conditions. And if you're running heavy equipment up and down the Scott Abel line, I'm wondering, we got a commissioner here, I'm wondering if the county's paying for that. Are they going to maintain that road? Are you going to kick in some money to help with it? This is an unusual circumstance. You guys are doing a project that's a little different. You know, normally just go suppress a thing that would have been out already. Nobody been over. So here we have some special circumstances where the county is spending money for to help the Forest Service and frankly to help the county. I'm wondering if there's some relief for that. One more point and I'll shut up. I've heard stated here numerous times that we need to do something with the fuels. And hallelujah, and I've only been here 20 years, there's some people that have been here a hell of a lot longer than me. But fuel management is, in my view, one of the biggest issues on this, in this district. And the Forest Service believes that too. If you look back at what has happened with it, the Forest Service and the community has been guilty of suppressing it. It's a terrible thing. I'm glad to see we're changing that. But I'd like to throw out the idea that a managed fire, I keep wanting to say let it burn, because that's my terminology. And by the way, the Forest Service did use that. I'll find it and send it to you. Maybe 8 years ago. But anyway, the managed fire idea sounds good if you had a normal forest with normal fuel loading. If you had a lightning strike and you manage the fire, you know, it's wonderful. But when you have a fire, when you have a forest that's clogged, and we saw pictures of it just now, there are better ways to get the fuel out. They cost more. And, you know, in the back of my mind, I'm wanting to say, well, the Forest Service is using this because it's cheap. You know, you have a fire start and you're going to use it cheap. But I tell you, mastication or mechanical removal, or next up would be a prescribed to burn, is a lot safer for the community. Because when you do a prescribed burn, you have several weeks, months, perhaps a pre-work. As Gary said, there it is, you have a prescription that you must follow. It's a much safer thing for the community than to just accept that nature gives you a start, and wherever that happens to be, you build off it. And so, you know, I would urge the Forest Service, who has responsibility for this, to not focus on trying to use natural fire until this forest is healthier, and instead spend some money, turn loose of those dollars, and continue to work, as you're doing, on prescribed burns and mechanical thinning. Thank you.
I will address much of what you've asked in my closing remarks. So I think we'll go ahead. I know there was one more question in the back that I'd like to get to, and then we'll close this thing out. Okay.
No, he kind of touched on what I had to say. You know, looking at how you're planning and managing this fire and putting a lot of effort into it, how does that differ from what took place in the Little Bear fire? It started out in a similar situation.
I'll just
keep it short. So
I'll keep it short.
I think we can answer that.
I know the hot shot crew that was on that fire. That fire was full suppression from the get-go. Black and white, dirt and mud. That's what it was. You say that there was a lot of the communities were hurt, but there was also 2 hot shots that were hurt, one by rock and one by log. So those got hurt. They're lucky they didn't get the medevac out there. So when you have stuff like that taking place, that fire's on a 40% plus load. It's thick. You're hit by a snag, you're hit by a rock. Is it worth to sit there and stay in that fire and injure those firefighters? Or do you back out just a little bit and work the edges? And that's what happened with the Little Bear. It was full suppression. 2 people got hurt. Almost had to get medevac. And they continued full suppression tactics on it. It was never let it burn. It was never none of that. And those are the decisions that are made.
And do let me share one thing with you about Little Bear, because I showed up on the Little Bear fire on June 10th. I was with BLM and I was with the state, with the Type 1 Incident Management Team. For the public, what happened with Little Bear is that started 4 days earlier. But there was no notification coming out from the Forest Service to let folks know that they had a fire. In that 4-day period, there were several attempts to get firefighters in there, but they had to pull them back out because it was hazardous. They tried to contain that fire, and they were unable to do that because that fire, the fuels were too hot, it was burning hot, they had to retreat. But this is the piece that the public did not know about. So now, moving forward, the night that this fire was discovered, and every fire, if you all are tracking NM Fire Info, every time the Lincoln has a new start, there is a post that says there's a new start. It started 5 hours earlier. Resources are responding. That's the difference. At least you can track the activity that's going on, and to have a public meeting, like the lady from NPR said, it's only 20 acres. The whole intent was to have you here so we could hear from you and we could answer these questions and have you here as active participants. So we are trying our best. We really are. Again, just to close out my comment, this is a very, very unique opportunity. One fire in one season. Last year we had one fire last season. It was a 588 fire over on the Smoky Bear District, 800 acres, 5 days later. Buttoned up, beautiful. We hope to, in at least a year, come back to that photo point. That was a photo that was taken from a certain point and be able to show you the difference in 1 year after fire has covered that piece of ground. And hopefully it's going to be beautiful and green. So
what you're doing here today is based on what we learned previously.
We have learned, and I appreciate that this is something new to you, to many of you here. But with the combined experience of all these people who have been all over the country on these large managed fires, there's a lot of knowledge here about what to do and what not to do, lessons learned. So that strength comes together here. That oversight is huge. And this is a very, very conservative approach right now on this fire. So high confidence, take it for what Beth is sharing with you. There is a high confidence level in this fire.
What are your expectations for the local fire department now? There's another lightning strike out somewhere in the middle of nowhere.
Let me address that in my closing comment.
Okay.
I'm going to address that.
Okay.
So are there
We have one more set of questions
I
here.
just want to say, just keep up the communication to the public. That's all we ask. I mean, I think it's great. I think it's great what you all do on control. That's what tools you have.
So I want to hope, sure.
I would like to thank you guys very much. I appreciate what you do. You may not understand. You may not go without work to the time. Maybe.
Thank you. Yeah. I think that's an excellent, yes.
I like what you're doing, it looks really good and everything. My only concern is that when you go to drop the ping pong balls, you're already starting fires. You have to, I understand. And everything else. So at what point is it no longer called a wildfire? Because if it's a wildfire that gets out of hand, it's nobody's fault. But if it's a controlled burn that gets out of hand, well, then somebody you can actually pull a finger at, I guess. But I know that there's been sort of the same question asked, but at what point does a man starting a fire somewhere, at what point does it not qualify as a wildfire anymore?
This will always be a wildfire. The monument
Even
fire
though it
is a
goes pretty much
wildfire.
completely out, you're going to drop the
We are
balls
taking-
to start it on fire
Right.
again?
It's always going to be a wildfire. It's always going to be classified as a wildfire. We're taking actions within the perimeter of that to manage that wildfire, to prevent any loss if at all possible.
Why is it easier
and values of risk.
to manage a wildfire than to schedule a prescribed burn?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. Let me close out. So I think, absolutely, okay. I hope I'm gonna answer some questions. I don't know.
I was on the district way back when they quit logging. And a lot of, I guess my learning was from the timber people and forecasting what was gonna happen, did happen with all of this overgrowth and stuff. I'm just wondering, has it been or will there ever be logging
and that's the short answer. The short answer is logging has never stopped occurring on this district. We are logging today. We are doing it at a much smaller scale than we were doing in the past. This very area has a timber sale that's active currently that takes a few loads of logs out every day. So that is part of the management of this district. So in closing out, I want to touch on a lot of things that you have all touched on. I think it's obvious to all of us, I know it's obvious to me, that this is a change for all of us. This is a change in how the Forest Service looks at wildfires. It's a change at how we've looked at how we manage wildfires in the past. There's a lot of things going on right now, not just on the Sacramento Ranger District and the Lincoln National Forest, but across the entire country that are basically changes and resulting in huge change in how we manage wildfires. You all have seen some of the worst of it with these big fires, the Scott Abel and the Mayhill fire, the Little Bear fire. You all have seen it, you've lived through it, you've been here a long time. You see those fire scars every single day. So I know that this is a change for you. It's a change for us as well. We recognize that by suppressing fires, pretty much all fires over the last 150 years or however long it's been, that it's created a situation on the ground that's difficult to manage when we get a wildfire start. We recognize that, we've learned from that, and we're trying to make a change to where we can keep those large, catastrophic, high-intensity area ignitions from occurring in these mountains. It's not easy to do. What we've got here with the Monument Fire is an opportunity on a really small scale, on a really limited period of time, to actually try to do something that will lead to a future where those large-scale catastrophic type fires will be easier to manage, they'll be easier to suppress, they'll be less likely to burn into the canopies of the trees, it'll be less likely to sterilize the soils. We're doing it at a really small scale because we're learning too. So one of these shifts in management for us is we all grew up, every one of us grew up with the idea that if you got a lightning strike, you put that fire out. You put it out immediately. The minute you got on the ground, you got out of your car or your truck and you put that fire out. As time has gone by, we're finding that some of those fires with the conditions that we have now, we can't put out. That's happening when it's really dry, it's really hot, it's happening in fuels that are just as thick or thicker than what we've got on the ground here. And we're finding that we got to do something different. And we got to do it on a large enough scale to where it makes a difference into the future. So this is something that it's new. We're going to try it. We're going to try it when the conditions are right. The only time we're going to try it is when the conditions are right. When we talk about responsibility, I'm responsible for everything that happens on Forest Service on this district. I am not going to take a chance with any one of these guys' lives or any one of your lives and make a bad call because the conditions weren't right, just so I can burn an extra acre out there that's going to help over the long haul. I won't do that. I'm not going to do that. I don't think any line officer in the Forest Service is going to do that. What we want to do is take the right conditions and put a little bit of fire in there so that we don't have those big fires anymore, or so they're at least limited in scale. Mother Nature's unpredictable. We all know that. Every one of us knows that. We know that things can happen. We're going to try to be smart about it. We're learning from our mistakes. Obviously, the communication thing on Little Bear was a bad deal. We know it. We're trying to change. We're learning. We're talking to you. We're bringing you in here at 20 acres, 31 acres, whatever we're at today. We're going to continue bringing you in here. If this goes anything longer than this weekend, which we're talking 14 days tops for this fire, and I can tell you right now, and these guys are very aware, we're stopping, we're suppressing after 14. If we get to 14 days with this fire, we're suppressing this fire. And I don't care how many acres within that area it burns, that objective area of 940. If we get 50 acres and we're still out there 14 days, we're in. This is something we got to do. And the only way that the Forest Service is going to be able to keep these fires from happening at such a large scale is if we start doing this in place by place by place. And what that's going to mean is when we get those 5 to 10 lightning strikes, we're going to look at it and we're going to say, is this the right one to manage? And I can tell you that all of these people have been with me since Friday night talking about what the conditions are on the ground, what the values and risks are, what the safety from both public and firefighter safety standpoint are. We're not doing any of this lightly. These people have been working hard. And they're doing it for us, but they're doing it for you. We're doing everything we can to involve the people who are directly affected and the people who might be affected by smoke, by just the concern that this thing could go out of control based on past experience. We have your concerns in mind while we're doing this, and we're going to continue to have that. We're not perfect, I will say that, but we got the right people managing this fire, and we've got the right tools to do it, and we got the right conditions to do it. And so I'm asking for your help in helping us get to where we can manage this landscape on a large scale. We are doing a lot of mastication. We are doing some timber sales. We're trying to get the best cost, per acre treatment. I can tell you that right now, if we are able to do the things that we're talking about doing, the cost of getting 940 acres treated is about a quarter of what it takes to get 940 acres masticated. We're trying to do it what we can with the public dollars that we have. So that's important to us. More important to us is your safety and the fact that you're concerned. And so we're going to keep talking with you. You're going to see us out here for the next couple of weeks. We'll be talking to you. I'll be out here this fall to talk with you some more. We're also going to provide an opportunity for people to come out and see the fire. We are talking about actually having some field trips out there to where if you're interested in actually going out there with us and looking at the fire on the ground, we're going to do that for you because we want you to be comfortable with what we're doing as well, Mike. The only way that you're going to be comfortable and trust us is if we take you with us and show you what we're doing. So that's where we're headed with this. I thank you all for coming out here and talking with us. We're going to be here for a little bit, so if you have any other questions, you're welcome to come talk to any one of us. And thank you all. Appreciate you coming, and hopefully we'll get some good stuff done on the ground.
So I'd like to offer a few parting words too, and hit on some other points that were brought about in terms of engaging folks in the conversation, in the problem solving, in the solutions. And I recognize that as an important piece of the puzzle here. And I think you hit it right on the head. This isn't Forest Service in the community. It is us, right? We're stewards. We're hired to help manage your land. So there's a couple things going on that I don't know if you're aware of. I'll just put the commercial out there now and put the plug out that relates to this. This fire is actually in the area. The Southern Sacramento Restoration Project is a 140,000 acre project we're working on planning that encompasses quite a bit of this country. It's basically all the headwaters of the Rio Penasco, Chiquita. it kind of drops off over onto that west side road and tie into some other areas that have been doing some treatments out there. Wraps around all the way down in the south part, 140,000 acres. And we're looking at taking this on in a very broad landscape level planning effort to start working every angle we can to do the treatments, whether they be mastication, whether there's prescribed fire, logging, you name it. If it gets the job done and there's funds and ways to get it done, we're gonna be pursuing that. So that effort's ongoing right now, and it's probably one of the highest priority efforts that we're taking for Region 3, the Southwest region. That's Arizona and New Mexico forests. So it's got the attention of my boss and the regional forester, and New Mexico Game and Fish is right in the thick of it too in terms of helping with some funding to deal with the planning. But this is an important piece of coming to the table. We need to come out, and we've been talking, we've got another public meeting coming up on this, and we need to come out here. We've had a couple in Cloudcroft, and we need to come out here and do this in your backyards and have some conversations. So that's an important piece of the thing.
Right.
Another thing that I want to mention too that has to do with this whole fire planning business is some pre-fires. And, you know, a lot of times you see us when we're dealing with something out here. I made the commitment, and it's an expectation that I have, that we're going to be getting out here and sitting down with folks and talking about what are the values at risk, what are the infrastructures out there. Let's all of us get together and understand what we're dealing with there. We work on this together, so we have a common understanding of where it's right and where it's wrong to try and do things like this. And it's less of us sitting here saying, well, this is the right place and right time, trust us. We want to be able to sit down with folks and have you see it and be a part of that. Be a part of that decision making where you feel it's right. And where it's not just, you know, you got too much infrastructure, you got too much private land, it's clogged up, you know, you can't get fire in there until you do some pre-treatments. We know there's places like that. We know it, there's lots of it. This situation, sitting in an old burn, is actually kind of a unique situation in that sense, that it's not this dog-hair thicket that you're trying to put some fire in and hope to manage it for objectives other than suppression. So there's some commitments there on my part that we're going to be working on in part of this conversation about what is this idea of trying to take advantage, take hold of every advantage we can to bring this country back into a situation where we can better live with fire. It is going to happen. I will guarantee you're going to have fire out there. It's, you know, and the one thing that we've got, if you think about the fire triangle, we use it all the time, right? You got weather, topography, and fuels. Well, you ain't changing topography, and you ain't changing the weather. It's what you get. So all you can do is manipulate the fuels, and do that in the conditions that are the best way, the most conducive to minimizing risk, exposure to folks, private lands, life, property, firefighters, and so we collectively got to work together on that. There's no doubt about it, and you guys are definitely affected by it. You live in these communities, you live in these forests, you live off those forests. I know that, and it's important to us to have you be part of that, and have skin in the game, have understanding of where we're coming from. So there's those two major efforts that are ongoing things beyond this 900 acres that we're trying to put on the ground. So the conditions are right now, and I look at it very much short-term, long-term. If a fire was to happen here in the wrong conditions, we'd be putting it out. No doubt about it. that because there's opportunities to mitigate the fuels at this point under these conditions, maybe it buys me some time the next time we get the fire out there, lightning striking that area, and there's not the fuels, that we've got fire behavior that we can better deal with and more easily deal with. And that's what we're ultimately looking for in terms of this idea of resilience, right? Is being able to have fire down here where you can manage it. I look at that 4.5 foot flame length. That's our magical fire intensity, right? And that is something that you can really manage. It gets up into the crowns and you ain't managing nothing. You just getting out of the way. It's like trying to manage a tornado. You just hunker down and try and protect what you can given the situations. And that's the kind of stuff that will happen. It's just when it does and how can we mitigate that as in every opportunity we have to minimize those catastrophic situations where essentially you're just hunkering down like you would in a tornado and just save yourself.
I have one question I would like to have answered publicly. If a person goes in the forest, whether they're camping or whatever, and they build a campfire or whatever, they cause a fire in the forest, it gets away, it causes a massive forest fire. That person will be charged, fined, something. So if you are doing a controlled burn and it gets away and it gets private property, do you reimburse the property owners? Who is responsible for that? Do you pay the property owners? Will you all be charged?
So there is actually a process, it's a tort claims process where people put forth their claims and try and recoup the value of lost property in the event of those kinds of situations. There is a process for that. I ultimately am not the individual that ends up judging who gets paid and who doesn't get paid and how much and that kind of thing. That actually goes through an adjudication process for that to happen. But if there's negligence involved there, then government's on the hook. And that tends to be the situation in wildfire situations. Again, you have to tie it back to negligence, culpability, who did what and when. Did you have a good plan? Did you follow that good plan? Did you deviate from that plan or not? All of those questions get asked and answered if something gets out.
So if I start a fire in the forest and it's an accident, it wasn't negligence, it was just an accident, I will not be charged. I will not be responsible. I mean, what puts the federal government above the law that they want to hold the people to?
That's a good question.
It is a very good question.
If we've had those situations, a hunter, they were out there Barbary sheep hunting on Benson Ridge and started a fire, got loose in the grass.
And there have been people who have actually been sentenced to prison for such things, and even more recently, when there were firefighter fatalities as a result of that fire that was caused by a person, by an individual, they were charged with murder.
Oh, I know, but why? That's people, but if the federal government does it, why are they not held to the same standard the people?
I never said that. I never said that. If there's culpability, if there's negligence involved with something like that, it's outside the scope of what you should be doing, you're on the same level as anybody else. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not part of that. Folks that end up ultimately adjudicating and judging who gets what, who's found
at fault for any of those situations, even if it's the abandoned campfire that the guy comes in and says, I forgot it, and it burned up the place. So, in all honesty, most of the time I don't know. There are people that get charged with that, and ultimately there's payments involved. But
Well, like the Hammonds in Oregon, they were doing a back burn on their private property. It got off their property onto quote unquote federal land. They're in jail. It burned 140 acres. And it was during a fire season when a fire was coming towards their house, and they were, so, and it was an accident.
I can't get into commenting that. I don't know the situation to have any kind of educated idea of what went right or wrong in that situation.
Thank you.
The one thing to remind folks of is that importance of the Defensible Space campaign. And that was launched in the early 90s. And in the state of New Mexico, for example, Ruidoso was identified in 1997 as a community at highest risk to wildfire. And so over the course of 15 years, this Defensible Space campaign had launched, and some people were taking action to create that defensible space around their homes. And some people, for whatever reason, chose not to. So those become the more susceptible homes. If they're not treated, and they have that fuel load that can bring that fire right up to their home, whether it starts on private land or forest land or any other federal agency land, that risk remains.
Well, I understand that. I do understand that. But I just want to know if the Forest Service accidentally burns someone home, why are they not as responsible as if I accidentally start a fire and burn forest?
But I think that would be up to the courts. I think that would be up to a judge. That would be a lawsuit, like you were saying, a tort claim. Those, and if you see, like the Wallow fire, for instance, that was started accidentally. Now those guys were grilled every which way, but it turned out to be that it was not intentional. So, but other folks that have intentionally set fires are set.
That's a different story.
Well, and so even with the Forest Service, that's the same thing. It's the intent. They're not intending to burn anything. They're using their best management skills, their best information they have in a very risky, high-risk situation. That knowing that they are in charge of putting that fire out. That is just part of their job. If it's on federal land, now if it's on a different jurisdiction, that's a different story. It depends on the jurisdiction. But if it's on federal land, Forest Service jurisdiction, they're charged with managing that fire in whatever the best way they deem is the best way to do it. So there's never a malicious intent there to burn people's homes down, whereas like arson. I mean, that's just the difference, I think. I think there's
a lot of times people in the forest, it's not malicious intent to cause a fire,
but they are not made to pay for it. If you have a campfire, negligence is one thing, arson's another. If a campfire, if people don't fully put out a campfire, let's say, and they pour water on it, they don't realize there's coals there, that happens a lot. They go away, drive home, the wind kicks up, and that thing blows embers everywhere. It's a bad season, which, if there's campfires still allowed, sometimes it's on the edge of restrictions that they're going to disallow those campfires. They thought they put it out. They thought they took the risk, and so they're not going to be. They are going to. If they find them, yes, they're going to answer. They're going to be. It's going to be investigated, and all of that. And that's what Travis was saying. The same thing with the Forest Service. They're going to do an investigation of what happened. Was the Forest Service? They're probably held to a higher standard because of their knowledge and because of their responsibility for that. So they're going to be held to a higher, I'm not saying, I can't say what the judge would do, so what I'm saying is that, they're going to say, well, what was your plan in place? Just like Travis was saying, they're going to go through that whole drill. And ultimately, it's not going to be anybody local, it's just going to be You're talking single users there. So.
And you're talking federal court with the federal judge, and the federal prosecutor.
Right, there's all, I don't know all the intricacies of that, but I think that's more what you're saying. I don't think that the government, it doesn't get off the hook if I think negligence, I think the difference is negligence and is the intent.
And is the forest considered federal land?
It's federally managed land.
You called it federal land.
It's federally managed. Yes, public lands managed by the federal government.
Okay, because there's nothing in the Constitution the Constitution says 10 square miles plus sports courts and other municipal buildings. The federal government is not constitutionally, does not have the constitutional authority to all of it.
No, it's public land. No, the people, and it's managed. It's just like state forestry having jurisdiction to fight fire on private land. Of course, they don't know anything about that. That's just their area of jurisdiction for fire management.
It really should not be federal management. It should all be
well, that's political.
Yes, it is.
Opinions. I know.
It is